back to the show. Jess and I are here today with Caitlin Sullivan, our first ever guest on the podcast. And we are so excited to have Caitlin on the show. She is a good friend of mine. We met through Instagram and we've been kind of collaborators in each other's space for like quite a while now. And Caitlin and I just work so well together. I think our modalities and the things that we do within our business just really seamlessly complement each other. And recently, Jess actually gave Caitlin a reading in terms of her True Sky astrology chart, which was also really exciting just to witness. And I think that Caitlin had a lot of, well, I'll let you share, Caitlin, if you want to, but I think from what you've said that it was really exciting and valuable for you in whatever way that looks like in the future. So overall, we're so excited to have Caitlin on the show. Caitlin is a hormone health expert. She's also a Pilates instructor. She has her own membership called the Spring to Life Method. And I have been a part of the Spring to Life Method for quite a few years. I think it's years now. Wow, That's crazy. But for quite some time, I've been a part of the Spring to Life Method. Caitlin is incredible. She has a huge library of recipes for women and just such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to hormone health, women's health. And it really does go beyond that as well in terms of her perspective on cyclical living, which we really want to touch on today too. So overall, Caitlin is just so great. She's a joy to work with, and I'm so grateful for her for all of her expertise and the work that she puts out for women in the world. So excited to have you on today, Caitlin. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, both of you. When I was getting ready, I was like thinking about how honored I am to be the first guest on your podcast. I've been a fan since you launched, and I've been a fan of yours, Lily, for a long time now. And Jess, like being able to connect with you and get a reading was really awesome. So I feel very honored to be here today, and I'm excited to talk with you ladies.
Thank you for that, Caitlin. So just to kind of dive in so that people on our show get to know you a little bit better, one thing that Jess and I really want to hear about is your ballerina background. So I know a little bit about this, but I don't think I know the whole story. And so I'm really excited to hear from you kind of firsthand. What was your experience as a professional ballerina? Like what was that for you? And yeah, just anything and everything that you want to share around that and your journey with that. I think that's a great jumping off place for this episode.
Awesome. Well, thanks for asking about that. I feel like this is it was my entire identity for so long. And now it's like, it's not something that I share about very often. And I've kind of been thinking about that, how like maybe I can start to weave it back into my work somehow, because it is still something like that is a part of me. But I was a professional ballet dancer for 8 years or so. I actually graduated high school early. I finished my senior year in like 4 months. So December of my senior year, I was out. I grew up in Illinois, in a suburb of Chicago. So from that point on, I was getting myself on the train every day, going down to the city, training at a studio there, coming back home, training at my home studio, performing, started auditioning. And I made my entry into the professional dance world with the Joffrey Ballet in Chicago. I was a trainee with them, which was it was an amazing experience, especially as my first experience in the professional ballet world. I was lucky enough to be chosen as like an apprentice position. I performed in their production of Cinderella, and we toured to LA, and I got to wear the beautiful costumes and work with like the people that set choreography that came over from England because it was from the Ashton Trust. Like it was just such a magical experience, and it really fueled my desire to pursue ballet even further. And it's a very competitive world. I was honestly very naive about a lot of it because I didn't even realize that you could be a professional ballet dancer until I was like a freshman in high school, because I started getting really serious about my dance training, changed studios, and all these girls were on this professional track. And I was like, okay, like I've been dancing, once a week for the past like 7 years. And now it's shifted to this really intense program where I'm training every single day for 4 hours after school and all day on Saturday on the weekends. but I loved it. And I think there was a little bit of a mixture. Like I really loved the art form, but I also had this like intense competitive drive to catch up to the girls that were my age. And that's kind of what propelled me into this world where I was so obsessed with it. Like that was all I thought about. I skipped school a lot. Actually, when I was in high school, I would skip school and go downtown with the older girls to take ballet class. And it was the only thing I could think about for so long. And I was really lucky that I had such a great experience entering the professional ballet world, but it is really competitive. So I had a really amazing experience being able to work with the professional company with Joffrey. And then things changed right at the end of the season, and the director's eye went elsewhere, and I didn't get a contract. So I decided to make a jump to Milwaukee Ballet, where I had a similar position in their second company. And it was a total soul crushing, confidence crushing experience being at that company. So I kind of went on this from this really high, then I started going through all these highs and lows of my experience in that world, because you don't have a lot of control over anything except for you and your body. And I think that is kind of what has helped propel me into what I'm doing now. There is such a pervasiveness of like body image issues and disordered eating patterns and eating disorders, and just like this really competitive world. But at the same time, I haven't talked about this for a long time. This is actually really interesting to be describing to people that were not a part of it, because you're living like in this other world with like people that are not normal people. They're normal to you because like that is your normal, but it's not a normal lifestyle. And it's really difficult. It's emotionally taxing, mentally taxing, physically taxing. So kind of long story short, I ended up jumping from company to company. There are two different kind of like tiers of companies in America. There are AGMA companies, which are union, and that's like the same union that actors are a part of, and like Broadway, that kind of stuff. Musicians, they're in this guild. So if you're in a company that is a part of that union, you have certain protections where you have like certain pay minimums where you're going to be paid a living wage in the city that you're in, and you have certain rules around how long you can work and like breaks that you get to have. And my first few experiences with companies were that type of environment. But then you also have these smaller regional companies that it's kind of like the Wild West, like anything goes, whoever is in charge, however crazy they are, like what they want is what happens. So I spent many years working 6-7 days a week, really physical job during the day, dancing and rehearsing, and then also having to go work either a serving job or a customer service job in the evenings and on the weekends. And it's a really difficult world to live in. And by my mid-20s, I was really exhausted by it. I also went through a couple other big changes in my life. I lost my dad, and it was a lot. I had to remove myself from it at a certain point, but it was I don't know, almost like a first love, where it was like this really burning, like passionate thing, and then it kind of like fizzled out on me. So that's my history with ballet.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. That was something that Lily and I were talking about. I mean, because you had posted that, I think to your Instagram stories, that you were a professional ballet dancer. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know this about her. And then you shared it with me in the reading too. And I was like, I had no idea, because also for those listening, Caitlin's a Leo, and one of the main archetypes of Leos are being a performer. So it was so fascinating to hear that like that's a huge part of how she grew up. So thank you for giving us all of that insight. I'm really curious, just because, you mentioned within that the one thing you had control over was like yourself and your body. And I'm so curious if you feel like, just because I know, well, I'm sure it can be very, having been a professional athlete in that sense, I know how strict things can be. Do you feel like you ever disconnected from your body within that? And if so, like, did that influence like the work that you do today?
Yeah, 100%. I would say that for like the majority of like that 8 or so years that I was in the professional dance world, I was like almost completely dissociated from my body, which is, it's kind of a weird thing because I also had like extreme control over my body in the same, sense. But there's a huge pressure on body image, on like fitting a certain image. And I was lucky. I'm 5'8", I'm tall. I've always been like tall and fairly lean. But once I got, kind of past like 18, 19, I really struggled with like staying like lean and tone, like having like nice muscle tone to my body. And it was something that I really like internalized and felt bad about myself about, but I also knew that I was getting judged by the people that were making decisions about casting and thing. And there really is this thing in the ballet world where you get a fat talk, where you get sat down and said, you need to lose weight, to be in this show. I never specifically was told that, but could feel it at all times. And like, there was instances where people that I was really close to, like, we had similar body types, had similar habits and things, would get talked to and I wouldn't. And it almost felt like this is like such a mind like twister like thing, where in certain places where it was so toxic, I felt almost, it was a relief of not being told that, but also like, they don't even care enough about me to tell me that kind of thing. So you have all of these like layers of things going on in your brain. And I never had an eating disorder, but I realized later that I definitely had disordered eating habits. And part of it was really not knowing how to properly fuel my body. And that's not to say that I didn't get nutritional education multiple times at like various points throughout my ballet education, but there was nothing that really stick. There was nothing that like made sense. And also like as a young adult, you kind of are headstrong and feel like, oh, I know it's best, or like I can control this. But now being on the other side, I can see that so much of it was related to my hormones and being like completely like in a stressed out state all the time, and not, getting enough sleep, and not being able to take care of myself, and not eating enough throughout the day. And then like having this huge urge to like binge at the end of the day or at the end of the week. It was just kind of like this yo-yo experience it was really, I don't know, when I was in it, I was just in it. And then afterwards, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like that was my reality for so long. But it definitely informs the work that I do today, because once I started learning about hormone health and women's cycles and like nutrition on a really basic level in terms of like macronutrients, I was like, oh my gosh, no wonder I was struggling so much for so long. I didn't have the pieces to be able to put it together and figure out what was going to work for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Caitlin. I am really fascinated by the ballet world, just from you, really, and like what you shared. I'm wondering, what made you make the decision to leave that world?
So I was back in San Diego. I was dancing for a ballet company there, and I had previously danced for them. I had spent a season there, and that was like the first like reality check that I had in my professional career, because I got there and I was like, what kind of show are we running here? Like, what? This was like nothing like anything I'd ever been a part of before. So my contract, after my first contract expired there, I went out seeking greener pastures, only to find very similar, if not worse, things in my next experience. And so after that, I had gotten injured. I had taken some time off. I was kind of like floundering, unsure of what I was doing. I was living back home, and I got myself back in shape. I auditioned. I went back to San Diego, I signed a new contract with them, and I spent 2 more seasons dancing in my mid-20s, and I was really uninspired. So I don't want to like trash talk or anything, but the work that I was performing, like, it was nowhere near the caliber of what I knew I was capable of, or like even like something that I've done side projects. I have friends that are executive directors of dance companies now that we've collaborated on things in the past where I was performing work that, like, even though it was in a small theater with 50 seats or whatever, like, there's this experience that you have when you're on stage where it's like almost an out of body experience, or maybe it's like a totally in body experience, really, where you're just like in it and like nothing else exists. And I had experiences like that before. And then I was in this place where I was doing things like, I didn't even want people to come and see me perform these things that I was doing. Like, I was not proud of the work. And I felt like the company that I was working for, the leadership was not great. I just wasn't proud of what I was doing, and I was getting really kind of apathetic to it. I knew I had a bad attitude, you know, and then, things happened in my life. My dad passed away from cancer, and I was at the end of my season. And the way it works in the ballet world is you usually sign a contract for whatever the length of the season is. It's usually anywhere from like 20 weeks to, if you're lucky, closer to like 30 or 40 weeks of the year. So I was getting close to end of my contract, and usually you have like a conversation with leadership, with a director, either for them to like say, hey, hit the road, we're not renewing your contract, or like talk about the next season. And even though like I had pride always in what I myself was doing, like I was always going to like try to do my best on stage. I knew I wasn't like in rehearsal, like showing up as best I could be. I wasn't feeling the drive that I had always felt, even being in class, because as a dancer, you take class every single morning to warm up your body. And that had always been just like very meditative for me. I loved like spending that time with my body. And I was just feeling so over it because I wasn't being challenged in the way that I wanted to be challenged. And I wasn't, doing anything creatively that I really felt passionate about. So it kind of just felt like this natural, like, fizzling out. And then I had my meeting at the end of the season with the director, and I kind of surprised myself with how forthcoming I was about how I felt. And I think it's because I knew I was at the end, and it kind of solidified it because he still offered me my contract to come back the next season. And I was like, dude, I just told you, like, this is not it, like, especially this right here. So that was the end of it. And it was crazy because I lived and I breathed ballet for so long. I never thought I'd be able to quit cold turkey, but I can count probably on one hand how many times I've taken a full ballet class in the past like 5 or 6 years since I left. And I had to do a lot of healing. And it took me a long time to even get to the place where I was ready to do that healing. I think it took me probably like a year or two to even be ready to like kind of start to address that. But it was kind of this ripple effect that like pushed me to where I am today.
Yeah. I'm curious, once you left the ballet world, when did you start getting into health, and specifically with hormone health and even Pilates, and which came first, or were they kind of hand in hand?
Yeah, it was somewhat, they came very quickly after each other. So like I said, I left, and I kind of was in this place where I remember telling my boyfriend, I was like, I don't know who I am anymore, because all of my friends were the people that I used to spend every single day with in the studio. And now like that's not what I'm doing anymore. So I had to like figure out what I was doing. I think at that time I had been working on an undergraduate degree online. And that was kind of something that I had started, but before I moved back to San Diego, because I was living at home, and my parents, mostly my dad, was like, like, what are you doing? Like, and he had always wanted me to go to school, and I was kind of not, I was kind of on the fence about it because I had never wanted to get a dance degree. So I was like, no, I'm not going to do that right now. So I was doing that online, but I had changed from a fashion merchandising major to a business major. So went from something like really creative to something really boring. And I was just like trying to get it done. Like I just wanted to get it out of the way. And while it was online classes, and really while I was taking them, I was like, this is kind of dumb. Like I was like, there were certain like math classes, that stuff was hard, but like the like practical things that I was supposed to be learning, I felt like, life experience kind of gives you a lot of that. So I was in this place where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I started looking for jobs, and I ended up working at this spin studio that had opened up like a mile away from my house. And so that was kind of my entree into the fitness world. So I was just working front desk. I've never been a spin instructor, never will be a spin instructor. That's just not my vibe. But it was really interesting, and that kind of pushed me to like try some new things. But I was really struggling, number one, with body image, and number two, with just like functionality of my body. Once I stopped dancing, like, I don't know, I love the saying, a body in motion stays in motion, because I think it's so true. Towards the end of my dance career, I was dealing with a couple different injuries. I had like this kind of long-standing thing that had happened in my back. I had fallen in the kitchen of my serving job, fell like flat on my butt, and something had happened where I like compressed some vertebrae like in the thoracic area, and like it affected my neck and my posture. And so for a while, I had been, probably for like 2 years, I had been struggling with strength in my upper back because of how like my bones were pulling, like however that works. So I was struggling there, was having like, it was to the point where I would have to like trade hands on the steering wheel, because even like holding my arm up like that was really difficult for me. And like when I was waiting tables, it was hard for me to like carry trays and even carrying groceries in. So I was struggling with my body, and I would go and take these spin classes because I worked there and it was free for me to take classes. And I don't know if you've ever taken one, but you do the like weights, arm weight section. And almost every time I took a class, I would then get a tension migraine afterwards, because it was just like too much. And then like also you're hunched over the bike too. So that was really not great for me. And I had kind of dabbled in Pilates a little bit. I wasn't super like versed in it. But I had been trading one of my ballet teachers. I worked at a coffee shop, and I would bring her beans from the roaster, and she would let me like do Pilates with her and one of her clients. So I had been doing that and like feeling some benefits of it. And I had kind of expressed to her that, oh, maybe I want to like learn more about this. I want to become certified as a Pilates instructor. And she was like, honestly, it's not worth it. You won't make any money. There's so many Pilates instructors here in San Diego. So I kind of let that idea go, and I was working at the spin studio and trying to figure out what was going on, and had all of these things going on with my body. So when my dad died, he died of cancer. He was only 56, and it was like wake up call for me. I was like, and it had happened rapidly. He was always so robust, and I was like, I saw this happen, and I was like, I have never really thought about my mortality before, but this like is a big wake up call for me. Like I always thought that I was healthy, but then I started noticing all of these things that were like the normal symptoms, like the migraines, and I had really bad acne, and I was then started getting really fatigued and got to the point of like really bad burnout. So I started my Pilates certification first because I felt so pathetic, really, like I couldn't do anything with my upper body. So I just kind of intuitively knew that like this was the route I needed to go down to try to rehab my body. And for me, it just makes sense. I think like I always want to know what the thing is, rather than like, I guess I could have gone to PT or something like that too, but that didn't occur to me. So I got Pilates certified. I did this 500-hour certification with a very big franchise studio that is all over the place. And I started teaching right away, but it took me about like, I think almost a year to go through that certification. And I started teaching right away. And I still, like, I felt a little bit better in my body, but I still had most of the same issues with like migraines and chronic pain and all of that. So I started teaching, and then I stumbled upon this other like privately owned studio. And it's a completely different approach to Pilates. That's where I met my mentor. And I almost like immediately after that started a mentorship with her. So I dove in for another 6 months of education in the classical method of Pilates. And that just like changed my life, like blew everything open for me. And changed my body too. Like within a matter of like a couple sessions working with her, I could like feel things working like the right way. I felt stronger. I wasn't experiencing as much pain. And I was like, okay, this is what I've been looking for all of this time. So I was really excited about that. Loved, learn, like every time I was in that building, everyone that works there is so amazing. I learned something every time I'm there, but I still had all these health problems. So by this point, I was still dealing with my acne. I was fatigued. I was sleeping through alarms and missing like lessons because I was teaching 6 a.m. lessons at the studio, and then needing a nap in the afternoon, and like unable to digest red meat, and like having all of these like digestive issues and things like that. So that was when I decided to go to the holistic health coaching route. So again, I was like, I'm just going to use myself as like a guinea pig and like figure this out. I want to know more about this. So I started that. And that is where I learned about hormone health. So then I added the hormone health concentration onto my training, but it was so worth it, because that's when I had all of these like light bulb moments of like, I can't believe I've been treating my body this way for so long. Of course, I'm not eating any food until 2 p.m. Of course, I feel like crap the rest of the day. Of course, I'm really like angry and moody, and I'm eating a lot of processed food, so my gut is imbalanced. It was all of these things. And then like learning about the phases of the menstrual cycle and how I'm not meant to feel the exact same every single day. I think that was like the biggest thing, because I think especially like coming from the background of being a ballet dancer, you want to be able to perform the same way every day. But some days you're on your leg and some days you're not. Some days you're feeling flexible, some days you don't. Some days you can do really fast petita legs. Sometimes you feel like you can't get off the ground. And that translates into everyday life, So just realizing that like my energy, like it wasn't in my head, like my energy is actually fluctuating every day. My hormones are actually fluctuating every day, was such like validation and just like a sigh of relief for me. And I was like, okay, I need to know more about this. I need to know how to like make this work for me. And that was like the start of everything that I'm doing now.
Okay. So you touched on the cyclical piece that is such like a core part of your work. And I definitely want to go there, but I have this lingering question for you around your journey with ballet and why you decided to leave, and how you had kind of a lot of these health issues kind of crop up after the fact. So you described something that I felt as well when it comes to, for me, sports, this feeling of being like totally embodied, and it's kind of like, this flow state, a high, whatever you want to call it. And you described how it was really lack of inspiration that pushed you to leave, ballet, the world of ballet. And I'm wondering, thinking about it from that perspective, was your body speaking to you at that point when you decided to leave, or was it really this truly like this lack of inspiration? And what I'm trying to get at here with this question is, do you think that you would have left if it was your body kind of screaming at you, or did it really have to be this kind of dying of the love of the thing?
That's a really good question. And honestly, I have not really thought about it that way before. I think there was a couple different things at play. And another side of this that like I didn't completely touch on is that it's like an artist's life. It's a struggle. Now with like social media and like there's a lot of different avenues to like generate income for yourself. Like things are a lot different now. And I think I was kind of like on that like point like in my career, like when things were starting to happen, like I could have done things differently. So to back it up a little bit, when I was in high school and saying that I wanted to be a professional ballet dancer, everybody told me I'm not going to make any money. So that belief was really embedded into me. And I just believed that no matter where I got a job, I was never going to be making enough money. And so then there was also the layer of like, I always had some support from my family, but I also felt like I've always been really independent and wanted to like take care of things myself. So I always had a second job. So, or third job or a fourth job. So I was always like on the go running. So I think that for part of it was like my mental state was not in the right place. Like I wasn't 100% in with ballet anymore because I felt so pressured to bring income in elsewhere. So that was a big part of it for me, I think. And, if I had asked probably the majority of my friends, colleagues at the time, they would have been like, well, you're going to like audition, right? You're going to go somewhere else. And even just that process is so exhausting. I didn't feel like I was like physically in good enough shape to like feel good about going out to audition for the places that I would have wanted a job. And I guess my heart wasn't in it to like put that work into myself again and try again to like do this. So I think it was kind of a combination, but I don't think that the physical side of things played it into my decision to leave. But looking back, I think that my body was talking to me. And like, even if I wasn't like necessarily acknowledging it, that was probably like a underlying factor of me just kind of feeling that I wasn't there completely.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I was just curious because, sometimes our bodies can like force us to make big moves, like leaving an industry. And I just find it really interesting for you because your body, like you're so connected to your body and everything that you do, like even your job now as a Pilates instructor, your career, every career avenue that you've taken has been body focused. And I think that's like, so it is such an artistry. And I really appreciate you sharing all of that. And I was curious to hear like, okay, was the body involved or was it more led from the heart and that lack of inspiration that you were feeling? And it sounds like, the heaviness of the dance industry as well. And like what it really takes to make a living where you're comfortable and not always in this like fight or flight striving place doesn't seem to be an easy thing. So thank you again for sharing that. And one other thing I wanted to kind of touch on here in this journey that you've had with dance, with leaving dance, with moving into, being a health coach, hormone health coach, Pilates instructor. I know that you dabbled in the world of spirituality. I don't know how that plays for you right now in your life, but I'm curious what, if any, aspect of what you've described is what you would consider part of your spiritual journey or your any kind of journey that has something to do with faith. It could be, more religious, whatever kind of your thoughts are around that. I'm curious to hear how that played into all of this, if at all.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually. I grew up going to church, a Lutheran church, and it was kind of like a obligatory kind of thing. Like my parents weren't like super into it either, but like I think they felt like they needed to take the kids to church and there was pressures from grandmas, things like that. And it just was not something. I just remember being a little kid sitting out there and being like, who made this story up? Like it didn't make sense to me, as a kid. And so I was kind of apathetic to all of it. I got through my confirmation in 8th grade and then I was like, all right, peace out. I'm done with this now. And then I would say for a really long time, I was just like, I would describe myself as agnostic. And I think that potentially that, looking back and knowing what I know now, that also like had to do with my mindset. Like I did not have a expansive mindset when I was a dancer. Like there was definitely like, these high reaching things that I dreamt about, but it didn't feel attainable, especially when you receive rejection after rejection. There's a lot of rejection in the dance world. And Yeah. So I think I was really like disconnected from any spiritual side of myself for a long time. When I started to go through all of these changes with my health and with my body, I was kind of introduced to the more spiritual side of things and like different approaches to spirituality. I worked with the same business coach as you did, Lily. So there was a lot of that injected in. And it was interesting because it was not something I was really exposed to before, but um, it made me think about my intuition, made me connect back to my intuition, and also think about, things that I've experienced as a child, and like in the like intuitive, like kind of sense. And uh, it was kind of more of like unexplained type of things that were like distant memories in my brain. And I was like, I have had like these weird experiences, and it made me, I was very, I would say for like at least 2 years, I was like a sponge. Like I wanted to listen to everybody's like approach to spirituality and manifestation and uh, all of that stuff. Like I found it very interesting and also like an appealing alternative to like the mainstream of religion. And I think I got like, that's interesting. I think for a while I was like kind of heavily influenced by a lot of the people that I was surrounded with. Like I was listening to a podcast this morning where they're saying you're kind of the sum total of like the 5 people that are closest to you. So I think for a while I was really like immersed within a lot of people that were deep in the spiritual space. And that kind of made me explore a little bit more of like infusing certain things into my work and like playing with things. And actually it makes me think of, Jess, you were telling me when I interviewed you that like there are certain things in astrology that like you felt like you should do, but they just don't resonate with you. And I think that's kind of what it was for me. Like I wanted to experiment with like meditation and kind of more like ethereal like topics and stuff. And I find it really interesting, but I realize that it's more of just like a personal interest for me. It's not really something that is front facing in my work. But I do think that in the way that I approach movement and like the connection to the body, that there is some kind of spiritual aspect to that, because I think the one idea that really has like stayed with me and that made a huge difference in like how I felt about myself, how I physically felt, and everything is that I am in control of things. Or and you can take, I don't know, I'm not like I don't have any authority in this space, but like putting yourself in the position of God and feeling like you are, or source, or whatever kind of like term you want to use for it, that is the one thing that I find so empowering, and that really helped me to shift my perspective on a lot of things in life, and just being in control and moving away from a victim mentality. So I think that if anything has like stuck, that is it. But I'm not ever telling anybody that.
So it sounds like what you're saying with your spiritual practices, it's more of like a personal journey.
Yeah, definitely it's personal. And I think I have kind of struggled a little bit with it because there's a lot of should, like you should be connecting, you should be meditating, you should be doing this and that. And I tried a lot of different things, but not a lot of it stuck with me. And I think that's partially why I love your work so much, Lily, is because you are so about being just present in the natural world. And I found that that is what really feels most connecting for me, is to just, be outside and like spend time in nature and just kind of like disconnect from everything else. So yeah, it's been kind of like a journey of figuring out like, what do I really believe? How do I feel? Like, how does that mesh with like what other people think? Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think the key piece too is just like what you touched on around the empowerment of like, as women, especially like reconnecting with our bodies. It's like, it's so empowering. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
just really curious, like shifting a little bit into the cyclical living work that you do, I'm so curious about what that looks like, both for you and with your clients. And if you ever experience women that have a lot of resistance to that. And because I feel like in society, similar to your experience with your dance career, you want to show up consistently every single day. I mean, to be completely honest, this is something that I still like struggle with this. Like I still feel like I have to show up consistently every single day. And like sometimes I'll reach for one more coffee than I should just to like
Mm-hmm.
push me through. Like I'm a lot better about it now. But I'm just so curious like what you have to say around like if you experience women that are having resistance to that cyclical nature of their body, like what would you have to say to them?
Yeah. I think so definitely yes, there is resistance, and I know there's like a lot of people that just don't even think that it would be possible like to sync their life with their cycle. And I think that now I kind of fall somewhere in the middle where I think it's really empowering to have this knowledge about what's going on in your body, but then it's up to you to kind of decide what you can handle, unless like you're really burnt out and like you're still in that kind of like push through state, then you do have to scale back and like um really try to connect to yourself first. But I think the biggest like sticking point would be a lot of us don't have the flexibility to just be like, okay, this is my follicular phase. I'm only going to plan things out. And, this is my menstrual phase and I'm going to, just cut the world off. Like, not everybody has that flexibility in their life. So it's about, looking at your life. Sometimes you do have to make tough decisions of being like, is this really serving me? Or can this be something that I let go of? But it has to be individualized to you and what your goals are, what your life is. I think that like energy types, like human design, is really helpful for this too, because then you can also like tune into what your best like operating mode is as well. Uh, but it just comes down to like kind of understanding what each phase is best for, and then applying that to your life instead of like applying your life to the cycle, and just kind of figuring it out. I'm still figuring it out. Like it's something that just like evolves over time the more that you like lean into it. And I used to beat myself up about it. I'm like, oh, like again, another cycle that I, didn't, properly honor my luteal phase or whatever the thing is. But the fact is that your brain really does change throughout your cycle. So for you to not acknowledge that and like try to work with that, I think is kind of crazy, because that's where we do end up like getting angry at ourselves or getting frustrated at ourselves if you're trying to like outline a paper like the day before your period is going to start. Like your brain doesn't want to do that then. So yeah, I think it's about finding a middle ground. It's about finding a connection with your intuition to kind of guide you through it, instead of like trying to cookie cutter the cycle syncing or cyclical living aspect of things.
Yeah, I love that approach because I think for me personally, when I've not with your work, but just in general with like cycle syncing, I've felt resistance because I'm like, well, I don't like, what if I don't sync properly? Like to like what if I don't want to do that in that phase? Or like what if in my ovulation phase, like I'm really tired and I'm not feeling like I want to just go be a butterfly and have everyone see me. And so I think like for me, and I'm sure if I experience this, I'm sure other women are probably experiencing this too, where, there is that little bit of like resistance and like, how do we meet ourselves there? And I know that's just like so much of the work you do. Like I've heard Lily has talked about just so amazing, just she shared so much of just how invaluable your work has been for her. And it's been like inspiring me to like want to connect more deeply with myself in that way. And so I was just really curious about that piece of it. And I guess too, like, I know, you have a membership and everything around this, but from that like outside in or inside out approach that you explained, Like, how do you recommend women kind of get started with that? Just like, I don't know, to get going.
Totally. And actually that is something that I kind of wanted to add on to what you were saying, because I kind of hesitate to, especially like with the workouts, like I am not making like a hard rule, like, oh, this is day 2 of your cycle, you should be doing this. This is day 11, you should be doing this. I have, and this is just the Pilates aspect, just that movement aspect, but there are intensity, fluctuations. There are phase specific type flows, but we kind of all operate differently. Like for me, because I know that I'm kind of prone to tension migraines, I don't like to do a lot of lifting because I incorporate some strength training. So I don't like to do a lot of lifting in my luteal phase because I know that I'm going to hold that tension there. And the more that I incorporate weights and the stronger that I get, I do feel like that is kind of lessening, and maybe it's something that I can start to shift, but we're all at different points. So some people, it might feel really good to lift and like do some of my defined circuits in their luteal phase. For me, I keep those more in my follicular and ovulatory phase. Lily, I'm pretty sure you do mostly strengthen and lengthen flows, right? So Lily knows that she's not called to do much weight training now, which is totally fine. So I want it to be like a flexible tool. I think I have like a calendar where it's kind of outlined how I would suggest moving through the flows, but it's really up to the individual. And this is something from the beginning, and maybe I should start saying it again when I start my videos, is come to your mat and like tune in. Like, yes, this flow would be great for your follicular or your ovulatory phase, but like ask yourself, what does your body feel like right now? Is that what you need? So I think it's really about being tuned into your body and your intuition, what your body needs, kind of taking that should out of your head, because that was my downfall for a long time, where I felt like I should be doing really high intensity exercise, and then it would just set me back. So to back it up a little bit, for somebody that's just starting to approach this type of work, I really suggest, number one, starting with a reset. So I have really all of this, our hormone health is built on habits. So I wanted to offer like a really simple approach to kind of overhauling your habits. So I have a 4-week reset where we approach your morning routine, and then your like meeting your needs in terms of nutrition and sleep, and then regulating your nervous system, and then kind of going into the external factors. And then also the cyclical living aspect, where you're learning about the hormonal fluctuations of your cycle, you're learning how to chart your fertility, and really getting a better, deeper understanding of what's going on throughout your cycle. Because then once you're able to tune into that for a month, for 2 months, for 3 months, then it's going to be even easier for you to go in and pick out what kind of workout you want to do. Or if you want to go out and like sign up for a class with your girlfriends, you know when it's going to like feel the best for your body, and you're not going to be like dragging, So it's kind of comes down to that education piece, which is why like I've considered, and I'm still considering, like breaking off certain parts of my membership of making it just Pilates. But I feel like having that full integration of all of those educational pieces is so important for you to be able to really get the most out of the work.
Yeah. Thank you, Caitlin, so much for this. I just want to reflect. Yes, I have yet to do a define flow. I was just thinking about that. I've yet to do it. And it's funny that, you mentioned that, because I obviously take an intuitive approach to a lot of the things that I do. At least that's my intention, and that goes for the Pilates that you offer as well. And, the last couple of years, well, really the last, 2 years have been me healing burnout in a lot of ways. And so when I found your work, it was just so influential for me and felt like such a breath of fresh air, but also relief to, as you're saying, like embrace a lengthened flow as just as valuable as anything else, regardless of intensity. And for me, it feels so natural now. But I do remember a time when a stretch didn't count, in quotation marks, and I have some clients who have shared similar thoughts with me, where they're like, well, that doesn't count as exercise. And it really is just about your perspective and mindset. I also just wanted to say that I love your suggestion for kind of establishing a baseline, because I do think that it takes, a little bit of intention, to go into, okay, I'm just opening up this intention for the month that I want to be a little bit more connected to what it means to be connected to my cycle personally, and just holding that intention, I think can be really powerful, even if you're not sure exactly what that's going to look like for you, because as you said, it is, and I've experienced it, it is a month to month situation. Like, it's not about practice necessarily, but it isn't something that just reveals itself to you the second you sit down, and it's just like consistent from there on out, in terms of like when you want to do soft movement, when you want to be more, intense. And I have found that your suggestions, it really does, like, my energy really does flow with my cycle a lot. But I did want to bring in another part of cyclical living, which has to do with one of the aspects that you spoke on earlier about connecting with the earth and being in nature, and specifically kind of the food piece of the cyclical living aspect that you bring to the membership, which we've talked about before. But I love, I think it's so brilliant, and it really is a connecting force chord for me to nature, as well as, I have other practices too, of course, but it definitely feels important. So I'm wondering if there's anything that you want to share around that piece.
Yeah, I think that similar to like what you're saying about like the movement and connecting with your intuition, I wanted everything to be very like natural and easy flowing, because I kind of got like hung up for a while on how I wanted to share a lot of this stuff, because for me in the beginning of my journey, I was trying to get familiar with cycle syncing, and I was so interested in it, and I was like, oh, I'm on day 7 of my cycle, and I go to my book and like flip through and find the follicular phase and like what foods am I supposed to be eating. I'm like, oh, I don't have any of this stuff in my refrigerator. I'm gonna have to go do a full grocery shop to like make these foods. And it was just like I was wasting so much time like trying to fit into like what I should be doing. And also I over time I realized I was like, okay, well, these summer and spring foods are not in season in winter time, and vice versa. And it was just kind of like, it felt wasteful in a way. It felt just kind of like excessive and like too much and becoming stressful. So I wanted to make this much simpler. And with the phases of your cycle, you can correlate them with the season. So like your menstrual phase is your inner winter, your follicular phase is inner spring, ovulatory summer, luteal autumn. So we have these different energies that we flow through in our cycle, but also we live in this natural world where we're also flowing through these seasons. So the most logical and like easeful thing for me, and yes, we've talked about this, Lily, and I love that you're so into it too, but just eating with the seasons, and then, maybe varying your macronutrients within that, because, in the first half of your cycle, you're a little bit more sensitive to your insulin sensitivity is higher. So you can process more carbs more effectively. Not to say that you're just going to like totally load up on carbs, but if you wanted to do like maybe more a pasta night in your follicular phase, like your body's probably going to respond to that a little bit better. And then in your luteal phase, you need more fat and protein in your diet. So there's just these like small things that you can shift. And once you start to like listen to your body and like your cravings, you can kind of just like adjust and know that you're going to be, maybe craving more calories in your luteal phase, but try not to go for the carbs because you're not going to feel full. You want the protein and the fat, and vice versa for your follicular phase. So that has felt so much more in flow for me. And I think also for clients and people that have been using my resources as well, to be able to go to the grocery store and say, okay, this is what's in season. This is what is abundant right now. So that is great for me. That's great for my gut flora. And then I'm just going to like kind of tweak the macros within that, instead of trying to like have a whole different approach to your food from like week to week throughout your cycle.
Yeah, that was such a great question, Lily. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to hear what she has to say because it's true. And I do think that that's something that a lot of women struggle with is like what to cook and what to eat. And like, just really, I love how and it sounds like you really provide a good guideline, but you also encourage like the intuitive side. And even as you were saying, the first half of our cycle, I think you said, we're more insulin sensitive. Is that what you mentioned? Okay, so you said you'll probably crave more carbs. I was like, oh my gosh, there are definitely points where I'm like, I just want carbs. and so really just for women listening, knowing that those types of cravings, when you're craving things that are like not just sugar and junk, like that's your body speaking to you. Your body is telling you what macronutrients it needs, and it is okay to eat carbs, And so I think that that was just like a really, really good point that you touched on there. And now I'm like really curious about everything that's in your membership. So as we're wrapping up on time, and then also for listeners, Caitlin has an amazing podcast, the Spring to Life podcast, and she really dives deep into all the different phases, into what they mean, and of course her membership. But I just really wanted to give you a shout there because I've listened to your podcast, and I think if listeners want to educate themselves more, like Caitlin is definitely your girl. She has so much educational content out there about this that we didn't fully dive into today. But Caitlin, where can people find you? Where can our listeners find you? And yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that. I have my podcast. It's a Spring to Life podcast. Jess will be a guest on the podcast very soon. So make sure you're subscribed to hear more about astrology. So the Spring to Life podcast, I love my podcast. I'm on Instagram at Spring to Life Method. That's my main kind of like connection point with like my community. And then springtolife.co is my website. And that's where you can learn more about my membership. I also teach live classes in Flathead Valley here in Montana, and I'm taking on new clients. I'm actually taking on new virtual and in-person personal training clients. So if you wanted some one-on-one accountability with like just kind of a culmination of all of the things that we've been talking about today, I have some spots that are open right now. And yeah, I would love to connect with anybody that's out there curious about cyclical living, hormone health, birth control, all the things.
Birth control.
I know that's a whole nother can of worms.
Other topic. So we might have to have you back on for that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Caitlin. This was amazing. You are just such a light and such a wealth of knowledge. And I'm so grateful that like to have connected to you through Lily. And we were just so excited to have you on today.
Thank you so much. This has been so awesome.